He thought he was doing a good deed, inviting a shivering homeless woman to his office Christmas party. But when the CEO saw her walk in, the room went silent, and the truth that came next turned the entire company upside down. It was last Friday before Christmas in New York City, the streets glittering with holiday lights, store windows dressed in red and gold, and the air so cold it seemed to freeze your breath the moment you exhaled. And yet, despite the festive sparkle, Jacob Turner's mood was anything but light. He was a junior analyst at Hartwell & Compter, a financial firm where competition was cutthroat and everyone was scrambling to impress the big boss before year-end bonuses were decided, so when his manager told the team they'd be hosting the annual Christmas Eve office party at the company's rooftop lounge, Jacob knew this was his one real chance to mingle with higher-ups, and maybe, just maybe, make himself visible to the CEO, Leonard Hartwell, a man so intimidating that most employees avoided even riding the elevator with him. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Earlier that evening, as Jacob hurried toward the subway with a bag of cheap Secret Santa gifts in one hand and his coat collar pulled high against the icy wind, he noticed a woman sitting against the side of a closed bakery, her clothes tattered, her hair matted under a wool hat that had seen better days, and a cardboard sign resting on her knees that simply read, "Just need to get warm." And something about the way she wasn't begging, just sitting there quietly with her eyes down, made Jacob slow his steps, because she didn't fit the image of the usual street hustlers he'd been warned about. There was dignity in her posture, a kind of calm resignation, like someone who'd fallen far but still clung to a scrap of pride, and Jacob, whose own mother had once struggled to keep the lights on when he was a boy, felt a tug in his chest. Without thinking, he approached her, offering the coffee he'd just bought for himself. And when she looked up, he was startled by the clarity in her pale green eyes that seemed to study him rather than plead. And when she murmured a quiet, "Thank you," her voice was so soft yet deliberate that it felt out of place on the street. They chatted briefly. Her name was Anna. She'd been between places for some time. She didn't drink or do drugs, and she avoided shelters because of the danger. And as Jacob listened, a crazy thought popped into his head. Why not invite her to the office party? After all, it was warm. There would be food, music, maybe even a chance for her to feel human again. And in that moment, without weighing the social risk, Jacob blurted out, "Hey, my office is having a Christmas party. Tonight. It's indoors. There'll be plenty to eat. You could come as my guest." At first, Anna smiled politely, shaking her head as if to say she didn't want to intrude, but Jacob insisted, promising it wasn't a big deal, that no one would mind, and after a moment's hesitation, she agreed, brushing off crumbs from her coat and saying, "Okay, but just for a little while." They walked together toward the Hartwell building, Jacob feeling oddly protective, already rehearsing how he'd introduce her, maybe as a friend he knew from volunteering, and Anna walking beside him in silence, occasionally glancing up at the glittering skyscrapers like she was remembering something. When they stepped into the marbled lobby with its towering Christmas tree and crystal ornaments, the warmth hit them instantly, and Jacob noticed Anna's shoulders relax ever so slightly. The elevator ride to the rooftop was filled with the distant hum of party music, and as the doors slid open to reveal the glowing lounge with its panoramic city view, Jacob could feel eyes turning toward them, not all curious, some downright judgmental. As they made their way inside, the scent of roasted meats and cinnamon drifting through the air, laughter mingling with the clinking of champagne glasses. Jacob fetched Anna a plate, ignoring the side glances from coworkers, and tried to make her comfortable, but halfway through introducing her to a small group from accounting, the room suddenly went quiet, conversations dropping like someone had turned down the volume. And when Jacob turned, he saw why. Leonard Hartwell, the CEO himself, had just stepped through the doorway, his tall frame sharp in a charcoal suit, his presence commanding attention. But what froze Jacob's blood was the way Leonard's eyes locked on Anna across the room. his confident stride faltering for just a split second before resuming. And then, in a voice that carried over the soft music, Leonard said, "Anna?" And the way he said it, raw, like a man seeing a ghost, made Jacob's stomach twist, because in that single moment, he knew he had just stepped into something far bigger than a random act of kindness. The sound of Leonard Hartwell's voice cut through the festive air like the crack of a whip, and every pair of eyes in the room seemed to swing between him and Anna, the awkward silence thick enough to choke on. Jacob stood frozen, still holding a napkin in one hand, his mind scrambling to piece together what exactly was happening. But Anna, instead of shrinking back in embarrassment like Jacob half expected, slowly set down her plate on the nearest table, her eyes never leaving Leonard's, and there was something in her posture, straight, unshaken, that made Jacob realize she wasn't afraid of this man at all, though Leonard looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. The CEO moved closer, his steps deliberate but almost hesitant, his usual air of boardroom dominance replaced with something more fragile, and when he stopped just a few feet from her, he whispered, "I thought you were—" But the words caught in his throat. Anna's voice was steady, but each syllable seemed to carry a history Jacob couldn't begin to guess at. "You thought I was gone. You thought you'd never see me again." The way she said it made several nearby employees glance at each other, their curiosity practically buzzing in the air. Jacob's heart pounded. Had he just brought someone's estranged family member to the party? An old friend? A lover? And then Leonard's next words dropped like a bomb. "You're my wife." A murmur rippled through the room, people gasping, softly, whispering into their champagne glasses. Jacob's first instinct was disbelief, but looking at them, Leonard's trembling hand reaching for her, the way Anna's eyes flickered with something unnameable, he knew it was true. Questions began piling up in his head at lightning speed. Why was she on the street? Why hadn't Leonard found her? Why was she dressed like a homeless woman if she was married to one of the richest men in Manhattan? Anna didn't take his hand. Instead, she stepped back, her chin lifting just slightly, and said, "You wouldn't listen to me then, and you're not going to start now. Not here, not in front of them." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Jacob noticed the tension in Leonard's jaw as he swallowed hard, glancing briefly at the crowd gathering around them. "Anna, please, we need to talk. Not here, I know, but—" "Not here?" she cut in sharply. "When would here ever be good enough for you? You built a world where I didn't fit, Leonard, and now you want to drag me into it for— What, your image?" The entire exchange was like watching a private wound being torn open in public, and Jacob wanted to disappear into the nearest corner, wishing he could undo his impulsive invitation. But at the same time, he couldn't move, couldn't look away. Leonard's voice softened, almost pleading now. "I never stopped looking for you. You left—" "I left because you wouldn't hear me," Anna shot back, her voice rising just enough to draw more attention. "Because I was screaming for you to see what was happening to me, and you were too busy running a company to notice your own wife was drowning." There was a sharp intake of breath from someone nearby, the kind of collective reaction that said this was no longer just gossip. It was a spectacle. And Jacob's stomach knotted as he realized his co-workers would be dissecting this for months. Leonard's composure wavered, his hands curling into fists at his sides, not in anger but in some desperate attempt to hold himself together. "Please," he said again. "Just let me explain." Anna shook her head, and for the first time, Jacob saw her eyes glisten, though no tears fell. "You don't get to explain to me in front of strangers," she said, her voice low now, trembling slightly. "If you really meant it, you'd have found me before tonight." She turned then, not toward the door, but toward Jacob, and for a moment, her face softened. "Thank you for the invitation. I'll see myself out." And just like that, She walked toward the elevator, her steps measured, her head high, while Leonard stood rooted in place, watching her go like a man who'd just realized the cost of his own blindness. The room stayed hushed until the elevator doors slid shut, and then the whispers began again in earnest, a mixture of shock, sympathy, and shameless curiosity. Jacob wanted to slip away quietly, but before he could, Leonard turned to him, his eyes sharp but not unkind, and said, "Don't go. I need to know exactly how you found her." The party noise had dulled to a low, uneasy hum as Leonard gestured for Jacob to follow him out of the lounge and into a quieter hallway lined with frosted glass offices, the muffled city sounds seeping in from the floor-to-ceiling windows. Jacob's pulse raced, his mind torn between guilt and disbelief at the surreal turn of events. This was supposed to be a simple office Christmas party, a few polite conversations, maybe a handshake from the boss if he was lucky, and instead, here he was walking beside one of the most powerful men in New York, about to explain how he had just reintroduced his CEO to his estranged wife. Leonard stopped near a corner office, shutting the door behind them, his hands pressed against the sleek mahogany desk like he needed it to steady himself, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, stripped of the authority it usually carried. "Start from the beginning. Where did you see her? How did you know her name?" Jacob recounted the whole thing, the bakery stoop, her quiet dignity, the coffee, the sign that read, "Just need to get warm," watching Leonard's face carefully for any sign of anger, but instead, he saw something closer to pain, the kind of raw hurt that didn't fit with the sharp lines of a man used to winning every battle. When Jacob finished, Leonard leaned back in his chair, staring at a point on the wall as if trying to pull memories out of it. And then he said, "Anna and I met in grad school. She was studying urban planning, brilliant, idealistic, and stubborn in the best way. We married young. She kept me grounded when I was building this company, reminded me there was more to life than quarterly reports. But somewhere along the way," he trailed off, rubbing a hand over his face, "I started losing sight of her. I thought providing, for her, lavish house, cars, vacations, was enough. She wanted more time, more me, and I wasn't there. When her father died, she spiraled into grief, but I was too busy finalizing a merger to see how deep it went. She told me she felt invisible. We argued. She left. I thought it was temporary." Jacob listened, his chest tightening. The man in front of him wasn't the untouchable CEO anymore. He was a husband who'd missed all the warning signs. "When she didn't come back," Leonard continued, "I hired private investigators, reached out to everyone she knew. Nothing. No credit card activity, no cell phone. It was like she'd vanished. I even considered—" He stopped, his voice breaking slightly, then pushed through. "I even considered she might be dead, but I never imagined she was living on the street." Jacob hesitated before asking, "Why? Didn't she reach out to you? If she wanted to be found?" Leonard's jaw clenched. "Because she didn't want to be found by me, not the me I'd become. She probably thinks I only care about appearances. And maybe back then she was right." He leaned forward, his gaze locking on Jacob's. "Tonight was the first time. I've seen her in 5 years." The weight of those words settled heavily between them, and Jacob found himself torn between pity for Leonard's regret and admiration for Anna's strength. She hadn't come running back at the sight of him, hadn't crumbled under the weight of the past. She had walked away again, choosing her dignity over his money. "Where do you think she'll go now?" Jacob asked quietly. Leonard shook his head. "I don't know, but I can't let it end like that." His eyes hardened, not in coldness, but in resolve. "I need to find her. Tonight." Jacob shifted uncomfortably, knowing the city was vast and winter nights were unforgiving. "I can help," he offered. "She trusts me, At least a little. Maybe if I go with you? Leonard studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Fine. We'll start where you found her. Within minutes, they were back in the street, the glittering lights of Fifth Avenue casting long shadows on the snow-dusted sidewalks, the warmth of the party far behind them. They stopped by the bakery first, but the spot where Anna had been. Sitting was empty, the only trace a faint imprint in the snow and a few crumbs. Jacob scanned the street, imagining her small figure disappearing into the night, and felt a pang of urgency. She said she avoids shelters, he recalled. But there's a church down on 9th that keeps the doors open in the cold. Maybe she'd go there. Leonard didn't hesitate, and they made their way through the biting wind, their breath coming in clouds. When they reached the church, a few bundled figures sat on the steps, sipping from paper cups of soup, but none were Anna. A volunteer confirmed she'd been there earlier, warming herself for an hour before heading toward the East River. The two men exchanged a glance, part relief that she was still in the area, part dread at the thought of losing her. Trail. They continued on, their shoes crunching in the thin layer of ice on the pavement, until finally, near the waterfront, Jacob spotted a lone figure sitting on a bench, wrapped in a wool coat too thin for the temperature, staring out at the black water shimmering under the streetlights. Anna, Jacob called softly as they approached, but she didn't turn until they were just a few feet away. Her eyes moved past Jacob to Leonard, and the flicker of surprise there was quickly replaced with guarded distance. You followed me, she said flatly. I had to, Leonard replied, his breath visible in the cold. Not to drag you somewhere you don't want to be, not for the company's image, for me, for us. Anna's expression didn't soften, but she didn't walk away either, and Jacob felt that maybe, just maybe, this night wasn't over yet. For a long moment, the only sounds were the soft lapping of the river against the pier and the distant hum of traffic from the bridge above, the cold air curling around them like a living thing. Jacob stood a respectful distance back, sensing that whatever was about to unfold belonged entirely to the two of them, though his presence was a silent bridge keeping Anna from bolting, and Leonard, for all his power and precision in the corporate world, seemed suddenly unsure of where to begin. Finally, he stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching on the frost, and said, I don't expect you to forgive me, not tonight, maybe not ever, but I need you to know I see it now, Anna. I see you. She didn't answer, her gaze still, fixed on the black ribbon of the river, but her shoulders shifted slightly, as if she'd heard something worth acknowledging. Leonard went on, his voice steady but edged with the kind of rawness Jacob had never heard in a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals for breakfast. When you left, I told myself you just needed space. I buried myself in work so I wouldn't have to face how much I'd hurt you. I thought success would fill the hole you left. It didn't. Every day I looked for you. Every night I wondered if you were warm, if you were safe. And every year I hated myself a little more for not finding you. Anna finally turned her head, her green eyes locking onto his, and Jacob swore he saw 1,000 unspoken memories pass between them. Laughter from another life, fights they never resolved, promises they once believed. You think showing up, here in the cold with a speech changes anything? She asked quietly, her voice not cruel but tired, like someone who'd been carrying the same weight too long. Leonard shook his head. No, I don't want to change the past. I want a chance to make the future different, even if it's not as my wife, even if it's just making sure you have a roof over your head. Anna's mouth tightened. You think I've been sitting out here all these years waiting for a rescue? She said, her tone sharper now. I learned to survive without you. I don't need your money. Leonard stepped closer, not flinching under her words. Then don't take my money. Take my time. Let me be there this time, the way I should have been before. Her eyes glistened, and for a heartbeat, Jacob thought she might cry, but instead she took a deep breath and looked away again. "It's not that simple," she murmured. "You don't just walk back into someone's life because you finally decided you're ready." Leonard swallowed hard. "Then tell me how. Tell me what to do. Or tell me to walk away, and I will, but I won't leave without knowing I tried." The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of snow, and Anna closed her eyes for a moment, her hands tucked deep into her coat pockets. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but it carried a weight that made Jacob's chest ache. "If I agree to see you again, it's on my terms. No media, no grand gestures, just coffee, somewhere quiet. And if I walk away after that, you let me." Leonard nodded instantly, a flicker of hope breaking through the strain on his face. "Coffee," he agreed. "Anywhere you want." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time that night her expression shifted from guarded to something warmer, if only by a fraction. "We'll see," she said, standing and pulling her coat tighter. She glanced at Jacob and gave him a small nod of gratitude, one that said more than words could have about what his simple invitation had meant. As they walked together back, toward the main street, Leonard kept a respectful distance, not touching her, not rushing her, just matching her pace in the freezing dark, and Jacob followed a step behind, feeling like he'd just witnessed the fragile beginning of something that could either heal two broken lives or close the door forever. By the time they reached the corner where Anna would head in one direction and Leonard in another, she stopped, looked at them both, and said, "Merry Christmas," before disappearing into the night, her figure swallowed by the falling snow. Leonard stood there watching until she was gone, his breath misting in the air, then turned to Jacob with a look of quiet resolve. "Thank you," he said simply. And though they said nothing more, Jacob knew this wasn't the end. It was the first step of a long, uncertain road, and as he made his way home under the glow of the city's holiday lights, Jacob thought about how one impulsive act of kindness had changed the course of 3 lives in a single night, proving that sometimes the smallest invitation can open the door to the biggest miracles: one cup of coffee, one act of kindness, and a secret that turned an entire company upside down. If you believe kindness can change a life, share this story today, because you never know who's waiting for an invitation that could change everything.